Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Carsten Tams. In this episode 3, we will give you or discuss Gamechanger 2 for compliance and ethics training, and that being experiential learning. Carsten, first of all, welcome back.
Great to be back, Tom.
Carsten, let's start with some of the basics because maybe not all of our listeners have heard that. They may have heard the term experiential learning, but they may not know the theory and practice behind it. So could you give us a little few-minute tutorial on that topic?
I'll try. Tom, you look like a motorcycle guy. Maybe I'm wrong, but when I see you, I imagine kind of an old Indian in the garage.
Bicyclist.
Okay. We can run with bicycle. I'm a bicyclist too. So I'll describe experiential learning using an example. So how do we learn how? I'll stay with a motorcycle metaphor. So how do we learn how a motorcycle engine works, right? Of course, we can look at the manual, read the manual from first to last page, look at the technical drawings and what have you, and that will give us a certain degree of understanding. Alternatively, we can whip out a crank and start disassembling the engine, with our hands, and we feel the resistance of the nuts and all of that. And once we have disassembled it, we put it back together. Hopefully, we remember the right sequence. And so these two approaches kind of exemplify the difference between a more conventional learning approach and an experiential learning approach. So experiential learning really emphasizes, that learning shouldn't just be happening passively in our mind that receives. We use our sensory organs primarily to receive information, to store it, and to regurgitate it in the moment when it becomes relevant. But rather, learning should be an experience that really engages us more fully. Experiential learning is not just about, as I said, it's not just about receiving information. It's a generative experience. We learn a lot in the process of tackling problems, tinkering with things, building things, rolling up our sleeves, getting our hands dirty. It's kind of channels the maker spirit in us, and this kind of experience leads, and this is what the science of education also supports, leads to a deeper understanding of the issues, a better retention of information, and a better transfer of the learned information also to novel problems as we encounter them. So maybe that as a first rough outline of what experiential learning is.
So maybe let's now move to how you think it can be utilized by the compliance professional, Carsten. You told us some of the key ideas behind it and perhaps where it comes from. How can we maybe move to this concept in practice in the E&C world?
All right. Let's talk about. I'd love to come back at some point, maybe a little bit about the historic roots of the idea, but let's right away jump to what this might look like in our practice, the field of organizational ethics, and a good way maybe to describe it. So let's say one way we can do this is by putting people, around a table, let's say a group of 3 to 5 people, and we give them a lifelike problem, a situation, a scenario. By lifelike, I mean it is something that could be meaningful to them, that they could envision experiencing themselves, or that they might already have experienced. And then, so what could the scenario look like? So let's imagine somebody overhears a conversation of people talking about hiring a new colleague, and they're talking about all the wrong selection criteria. They're talking about gender, about maybe family plans of the candidate in the near future after getting married recently, or we talk about ethnic or national background. So all things that really shouldn't factor into that are actually the basis of discrimination and that shouldn't factor into hiring decisions. And so this person says, how can I avert catastrophe here? How can I intervene? What can I do as a bystander to help uphold our ethical commitments to equal opportunity and non-discrimination? And so now the 3 to 5 people around the table are tasked to come up with a strategy for addressing this. So we want them to consider what are the ethical commitments at stake, what are, to brainstorm possible actions they can take to address this issue, and also what resources are available in the organization for support, what point of contact exists, what people or departments are there that we can turn to for help and support. And now, you step back and let people take a crack at it, try to solve the problem on their own with relatively little intervention. This is a learning experience that I set up very similar to what I've just described in with an ethics game, and we'll discuss game-based or playful learning in a subsequent episode. But this is the exact purpose, is to create an experience where that goes beyond identifying, looking at a scenario and saying, is this behavior allowed or not allowed? Is it prohibited? Is it right or wrong? It really engages participants and learners in solving real world, lifelike, meaningful problems as they may encounter them in real life.
So, Carsten, I have to say it, and it's coming. All I'm hearing is, Tom, it's all about the UX. Let's get everybody together. Let's have input. Let's get their thoughts. Let's see what our values are. Let's move forward, and then, we'll assess. But what I wanted to do, and why I asked you to describe that process a little bit earlier in the podcast, is now take what you've just described, and tie it back to some of the historical context, because I think it will really help our listeners understand how the experiential learning has developed, and how really the early developers of this theory were really on to something that we can use here in 2024.
Yeah, great. So the idea is really incredibly old. You can trace the roots back to Greek antiquity. I always like to turn back to Aristotle on a lot of things, because he was such an expansive thinker, and his ideas are still relevant in many and supported often by today's science. And he really emphasized this idea of learning by doing, and interestingly, not just as a general learning method, but specifically as it applies to ethics. I'll give you a quote here. The virtues we do acquire by first exercising them, just as happens in the arts. Anything we have to learn to do, we learn by actually doing of it. People become builders by building, and instrumentalists by playing instruments. Similarly, we become just by performing just acts, right? And he equates justice with virtue or ethics. So we become ethical by doing ethical things. And so this is already right there in antiquity. We have it, and it's not just the Western idea. Confucius also famously said, "What I hear, I forget. What I see, I remember. What I do, I understand." So the similar idea. And then it was picked up in 20th century pedagogy. Major thinkers of experiential learning were John Dewey here in the United States, also a gentleman called David Kolb, Maria Montessori, some of these forward-thinking pedagogues. This idea of experiential learning is very much at the center of their thinking. And Montessori very nicely said that the hands are the instruments of our intelligence. I really like that quote. Yeah, and then interestingly, also the concept is picked up in hard sciences these days, cognitive and neuroscience. There's a research project called Embodied Cognition, and it challenges this very old idea going back to René Descartes of mind-body dualism, which says, the mind is very independent from the body. And so this new research project really looks at, how is cognition linked to action and to enactment through our body, through our senses, through our sensory experience with the environment around us. So there's also hard science behind it. And if I may, I'll just mention one last concept. Albert Bandura, he's famous among other things he's psychologist, famous among other things for social learning theory. And he says that people learn a lot, including about ethics, through observing others, through observing role models and imitating these role models. He also talks, an important idea of his is self-efficacy, which is very important in learning. Self-efficacy is our confidence in our ability to produce desired outcomes through goal-directed effort. Okay, very technical language. But essentially, it's confidence in our abilities, and this is a goal of learning. In particular, ethics learning, you want people to feel confident that if they speak up, they can produce a desired result. And the key source, the most important source of self-efficacy, he says, is what he calls an active mastery experience, and that is trying your hand at something and succeeding. So incrementally, as you repeat something and you get better at it, your self-efficacy gets stronger. So again, this points to the importance of experience. And I leave the discussion here, but this gives an idea of, where this idea of experiential learning comes from.
Carsten, we have had from time to time people on this podcast talk about Plato. I believe we've had people talk about Confucius, but I will tell you, you're the first person to bring up John Dewey. So kudos.
Thank you.
Could maybe we end with the following question that many compliance professionals may say, well, Carsten or Tom and Carsten, this is certainly interesting. The research indicates this may be a real thing, but I'm a little concerned that I can't document this for the Department of Justice, that they may, as bad as check the box is, I've got a box checked.
Mm-hmm.
How would you suggest if a compliance professional said, Carsten, how do we document what we are doing here so that it could at least I could demonstrate regulatory or FCPA compliance if a regulator comes knocking?
No, excellent question. I think, I would probably advocate for a blended approach between, some learning that is truly experiential, truly social, truly, because it is a richer, deeper learning experience and has better chances at affecting, attitudes, behavior, confidence, and what have you. Having said that, if you're in a huge corporation with operations around the world, is it meaningful to also have some foundational virtual online training that allows you to connect with let's say 50,000 or 100,000 employees around the world and be able to check the box and document people have gotten basic foundational information about our whistleblowing system, about our ethics code and what have you? Yes, I would say do it. Now, but I would also advocate that you complement that with this kind of experiential learning, and it can be scaled in theory, but you don't have to start with your entire workforce population. You can already think about, okay, what kind of meetings do I have coming up anyway? Where do I participate, and how can I enrich my interaction with the participants by adding an experiential learning experience to the mix that is truly interactive, where people get to think and solve problems. So that's what I would say. And then But if you do want to scale it, it's possible. For instance, one way to do it, some organizations have, for example, ethics ambassadors, or some call it ethics champions, compliance champions. And you can easily implement a kind of train the facilitator model where you train these people in conducting these kinds of experiences. And then they administer that in the various locations. Or you could do the same by partnering with people in the HR organization. I'm not saying it's you can do it by the click of a few buttons, but it is conceivable. That would be my answer. What do you think?
I think you're on to something, Carsten, but unfortunately we are near the end of our time for this episode. But I hope our listeners will listen in on episode 4, which is Gamechanger number 3, Making Training Social. Carsten and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Likewise, Tom.